What's going on, guys? We're back at it here on the last video of the series. By the end of this video, we will be starting this motorcycle and doing some basic carburetor tuning on it and then an engine break-in. But before we can get to all of that, we need to do some work on setting up the suspension, getting the chain set up. It's already, chain tension's already correct, but we need to do some chain alignment work. And then we can move on to addressing the engine. So let's have a talk real quick about setting up the sag on a motorcycle. Setting up the sag on any motorcycle, whether it's a street bike or a dirt bike, is an important step. Typically people will only set up sag on the rear shock or the rear suspension because that's the portion that is most affected by the load, meaning the rider, any luggage or additional stuff you have near the back mounted on the motorcycle. The front suspension and sag can also be set up on most motorcycles. However, it's not affected as much by the rider's weight. This motorcycle has the standard springs and the standard valves in the front end, and it has the stock valve and an aftermarket spring set up for my rider weight. I'm about 200 pounds, so I had to get a spring that's a little bit stiffer in order to accommodate my weight, plus any of the gear I might be wearing. There's two types of sag that we're going to be paying attention to. Rider sag, which is the amount of compression of the shock that occurs when the rider's on the motorcycle. And then there's static sag, which is actually what's going on right now with the way the motorcycle just standing on its own two wheels. So we're going to be paying most attention to rider sag. The static sag is a byproduct of the spring rate and the preload that you've put into it. So we have to make a list here. Let's start with a little bit of math. The rear shock, or the amount of travel in the rear end of this motorcycle, is 315 millimeters. I pulled that number out of the manual I've been using for the rebuild. Generally speaking, when you set up the sag for a motorcycle, you want between 33 and 35% of the total travel to be rider sag. So in this case, we're looking at about 104 to 110 millimeters of sag for the rear suspension, and I have no idea what we're at right now. So the first thing we have to do is figure out if we're between that 104 and 110 millimeters of sag right now, and if we're not, we need to either add or remove preload, pre-tension on the spring to get the sag to the right amount. Now the only thing that I'll mention about this is if you're going to go to the trouble of setting up sag, you should also go to the trouble of making sure that you're at the weight that you're going to be when you're riding. So that means boots, pants, in this case chest protector, maybe a tool belt, helmet, gloves, the whole shebang. So I'm going to get myself as close to the weight I would be if I was riding this motorcycle. And you also want to make sure that you have about a half a tank of fuel in the bike so that you're measuring the weight of that as well. And then we're going to measure the sag. So the first step here is for me to actually get geared up. So I don't have shit for riding gear. I have a helmet and I have some street gear. It's going to be a combination of stuff. All I'm trying to do here is simulate the amount of weight that it would be if I was loaded down in normal riding gear. That being said, there's no making fun of me for not actually having riding gear. I haven't ridden this thing in close to 10 years. I'm going to do my best here, but bear with me as I get as close to actual rider weight as I can. Now that I'm mostly geared up here, but before I put the helmet and gloves on, we're going to get a zero measurement for the uncompressed shock. So the easiest way for me to do this is to use a digital sag scale. There's lots of methods you can do, even tape measure if you have nothing but a tape measure. But this is the way I'm going to do it so that I can manage this setup while filming and pretty much doing it almost all by myself. So I'm gonna use a digital sag scale. I need to get the bike up on a stand so that the rear shock is fully decompressed or all the way extended. And then we're gonna set this up as a 0 for a 0 point. So the way this works is I actually need to measure the distance between the center of the axle and somewhere up on either the rear fender or the number plate. Now, the way that Slacker wants me to set this up is that rather than going directly vertical straight up to the rear fender, they want me to use the pivot arc of the rear swing arm. So I'm gonna extend out a straight line. You can use a piece of string or whatever. I've just got a piece of wire here. A straight line from the pivot point of the swing arm to the rear axle, the center of the rear axle, so something like that. And then I'm gonna swing this up until it hits a part of the motorcycle. So right here, it hits the underside of the number plate right here, and that allows me to establish the arc of the rear swing arm. And I'm just gonna make a mark on the inside of the side number plate with a Sharpie at that point. Now that I've got my point established, I can set up the sag scale. Now, if you've ever used one of these before, basically it's a string that measures digitally the distance. So there's a really strong magnet on the back of this, and we're gonna put this right up here on the rear axle, right in the center. We're gonna connect to this clamp that will allow me to come up to my point that I marked. And we're gonna tighten the clamp down on that spot. Like that. Now we're gonna zero this out. So that's my full suspension travel, no sag involved, rear shocks extended all the way out, and we're at 0 here. Let's see what it looks like when we take the bike off the stand. Time for a helmet. So now that I have my approximation of how much I should weigh, it's probably close to 120 pounds, 125 pounds, we're gonna measure the rider sag for this. I'm gonna do that by getting on the motorcycle, and we're gonna do it both standing and sitting. Again, 89. So we're about 89 to 90 millimeters of rider sag when I'm standing on the motorcycle. So one really important thing that I just forgot was fuel. I have oil, I have radiator fluid, coolant, but I don't have any fuel in the bike. I'm not going to put the fuel in the motorcycle. I'm just going to put this in my lap and remeasure the sag. .101 right there. 104, 105, 104, 106. So we were going for between 104 and something like 110. I think it was 103.95 and 110 and a quarter. We hit 104 sitting with the fuel, keeping in mind that's only half a tank of fuel. If we had a full tank of fuel, it'd probably be more like 106, 107. I'm not gonna fiddle with the sag, the setting. If it was too low or it was too high, you'd adjust the preload by adjusting the collars on this motorcycle. I do have to tighten down the lock collar, so I'll show you guys me tightening down the lock collar as we've set it up currently with 104 millimeters out of half a tank of fuel fully geared. After we do that, we're going to move on to the chain alignment. So the next thing we've got is chain alignment. I'm going to be using this Motion Pro chain alignment tool to be making sure that my front and rear sprockets are aligned using the chain. So this is a pretty easy process. I've done this on a couple of bikes before, but this is just some of the final tuning we got to take care of. Now that the rear suspension's been set up correctly. So first thing I need to do is put it back up on the stand. Basically what we're checking is the alignment of this rear sprocket with the front sprocket. Now the front sprocket can't be crooked. It's mounted to the motor, which is mounted inside the frame, so it's straight. The question we have is the rear axle straight? Meaning do we have the same distance from this chain tensioner block as we do on the other side? And one of the ways to check that is to use this chain alignment tool. This is a really simple tool that just has a straight rod and a clamp. So what you do is you come back here near the sprocket and you slip the clamp over the top of the chain and you clamp this down onto the sprocket itself. And then you can use this rod and line of sight to determine whether this is aligned or not. Let me show you what it looks like. What you'll notice is the center of this rod is just inside, barely just inside of the nearest in plate of the chain. So you have two plates, an interior plate and an exterior plate that's just inside. Here we start looking at the way this is aligned. It looks like it's a little crooked, right? So it looks like it's further out here and it sort of walks its way to the inside up here. And I would generally agree with that. I don't think it's off by a lot, but if we adjust the alignment of the rear axle, we can get this tip here over the top of, and just slightly to the left, maybe 2-3 millimeters to the left, to get this tip pointed a little bit more like that is what we're looking for. Just inside, the center of this rod, just on the inside of this. So what that tells us is we have two options. We can either adjust this side and the chain tensioner block on this side, or we can come to the other side and adjust the chain tensioner block on that side. Now, my preference is to adjust the chain tensioner block on the opposite side, because that doesn't then necessarily change the chain tension that much. It will slightly, but not a ton. So let's try that out. Alright, so now looking down the line, you can see I've got the same amount of gap, and you can see the same amount of that interior plate to the left of the rod all the way down the line. So we're lined up pretty perfectly right here. The rear axle's set up straight, which means that the rear sprocket's straight in line with the front sprocket, which means the chain's not going to be receiving any undue wear, and the bike's set up, or the drivetrain is set up correctly. Now that we've finally got this thing all the way set up, it's time to do what we've been waiting on for a long time. Before we can start the motorcycle though, we have to take it somewhere. So I can't start it here, I don't want to be tuning on it here. I've got close neighbors and I live in a neighborhood, so I want to take it out to somewhere where I feel like I can actually run the thing and get some of the engine braking done. So we're going to go on a field trip. Let's go. do is see if we can get it started here and then adjust the idle, let it warm up for a minute. If we can get it to actually idle, then we're going to shut it down and let it cool down, and then we'll write it in a little bit. So this is just the initial start. This is the first time I haven't started this. I have no idea if it will start. This could take a while. I could be kicking here for the next 15 minutes. So here we go.
Two hours later.
So why might it not be starting? If the spark plug's not giving spark, then we won't be, that might be an issue. I checked the spark plug to make sure it was sparking, but it could still be an issue. It's getting fuel. We know the float bolt's full and the carburetor. If the carburetor's idle isn't adjusted correctly, it can't start from there. What else? It's got air. The air intake isn't clogged with anything. Other than that, it's got exhaust. There's nothing in the tailpipe, and it's got coolant, but that wouldn't affect starting. That would just make it overheat super fast. So I think the only thing to do here is keep going. If we can't get it in the next 20 or so kicks, maybe we look at the spark plug. We'll go from there. So we're gonna pull out the spark plug and see what it looks like here. Remember, this was a brand new spark plug, so see if it even has been sparking. You can tell if there's any charred, or if it's just like soaking wet or whatever. It's still brand new.
So it hasn't been sparking.
Well, it hasn't been igniting. It may have been sparking. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this out, this old BRAEG with a BRAES, which is what the vehicle's rated for, the motorcycle is rated for. So let's see if it's changing the spark plug to this different one with the thicker anode, cathode, diode, I don't know, thing. Makes any difference. Put the cap on it. And if this doesn't furnish some promising results, we'll actually have to check to see if there is spark, which is the next step here. Okay, so I kicked it a whole bunch of times, and the only thing I can think is maybe we're not getting the spark we need. I've checked spark on this thing before I even had the body on. I checked spark on it. It's a two-person job, kind of, so I don't know if we're going to be able to film it. We're going to try, but at the end of the day, I might be using your camera person to, using Brittany to help me check spark. No sparks? No.
but it's so bright out. And spark is such a little thing.
So we're headed back now. Didn't get it started. Found out we have no spark. So I've checked this in the garage at least twice before we headed out over the course of the build. I remember checking it after I installed the cylinder head, and I remember checking it also because I had put in a new stator. So there could be any number of things going on. The engine cutoff switch could be shorting, causing it to not send spark. The CDI could be having an issue. It's the original 94 CDI. I had spark like 3 months ago, or I had spark a little while back when I checked it. So we still got the bike in the back. We're headed back to the house right now. I'm not sure what we're gonna do. We're gonna check spark on it and do it in a controlled dark environment with a garage door closed and stuff like that to see if it's just really faint. You just can't see it because it's so nice and bright outside today. So anyway, attempt number 1, failure, but I don't know, it's a learning process, so it's hard to call it a failure. Anyway, I'll see you back at the garage. Okay guys, we got the bike home, and you can hear neighbors, dogs and shit barking and birds making noise. Anyway, we got the bike home, and we closed up the garage, and
Sparks are sparking.
yeah, so she says as she walks by, sparks are sparking, which means that we do have spark in that we just couldn't see it out there in the sunshine. So anyway, I'm going to give this a few kicks here back at the place and see if we can get this thing started. I don't know what's different than what we were doing earlier. Nothing's going to be different, so I don't expect it to start, but it's worth a few shots.
It's
so
not gonna start.
Wow.
I
Wow.
hope it does.
Wow.
I hope.
I don't know how many more of these I got in me.
I just can't.
That's all legs, man. That's what happens when you're tall. You're all legs.
Oh my god.
Well, it didn't start. So we're back at it. Now we're chasing electrical issues. I got a confession to make though. The electrical stuff is the only stuff that I didn't replace. I didn't replace the ignition coil. I didn't replace the CDI. I didn't replace the spark plug cap. I didn't replace the engine cutoff or the engine kill switch. So we're going to go back and do some of that. We're going to start with some of the basics. We know we're getting spark. I want to show you guys a video. I'm going to turn down the lights. I'm going to show you a video of what that spark looks like. I want you to see what it looks like before, and then we're going to check out what it looks like after, and maybe even do a side-by-side comparison. But that means I got to take off the seat, the tank, the shrouds, the number plate, and get it back down to where I can get to the CDI and the spark plug cap. So let's check out the spark real quick, and then we're going to start doing some tear down. I'm probably not going to talk a lot through this because, I mean, you've already seen me build the bike, so I'm just going to go through the series of things and attack this like with a purpose, right? I'm going to move through this with a relative purpose to try and get this thing back together within a couple hours. So here we go. Okay, here's our spark comparison. This is before I do anything here. We're gonna run the Kickstarter. Go ahead. There you go. See that spark right there? There we go. So that's before. Now it's time to tear everything down. Okay, I'm gonna establish a ground by grinding down the powder coat here. Let me show you. These two. Alright, before I zip tie everything up, I want to check the spark again. Okay, this is the new hardware plus a new factory rated spark plug based on the manual. So a new spark plug from the manual. We're gonna see what that looks like here. This will be our final test here before we put it all back together. Nice and consistent, reliable. Okay. So we might do a side-by-side comparison real quick of the different tests. So, all right, here we go. Nice and consistent, reliable. All right, obviously a different day. I'm wearing different clothes. We're gonna put this thing back together here. And now that we have consistent spark coming from the OEM spark plug, or the one recommended by the manual, we should be able to get this thing started once we get it back together. If we can't get it started, there's a couple other things that could be wrong, including timing, which I haven't checked. Of course, I set up the timing based on the markings on the stator plate, but I haven't actually gone through and checked top dead center using a gauge and checking timing. So we're going to put it back together, see if we can start it, and then if we can't, regroup from there. Okay, now that we may have worked out some of the electrical gremlins, we're gonna try again here at the house before we take it out in the woods. Probably won't walk you through anything here. We're probably just gonna try to start it. So let's go. Alright guys, I know when I've been defeated.
At the door, you see someone that you know and they ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
This video has been delayed multiple times because I've been trying to beat the beast back here. Ordering parts, getting things all squared away. I know for you it's one video. I wanted this so desperately to be the last of the series, and I wanted to get this thing started at the very end, and I wanted to ride off into the sunset. But I've got more issues to deal with. So, in the next episode, we are going to be checking the timing using a dial indicator, using the proper method for timing. That's the only thing I can think of to do at this point. I've literally done everything else, including ripping the carburetor back out, checking the jets, the main jet, the pilot jet, checking the float setting, and then putting the carburetor back in. So anyway, we're not done yet, and I'm not giving up, right? So not after this amount of work and this amount of time. We're gonna regroup in the next episode. We're gonna be doing timing, and then we're gonna try again. So again, for those of you who've been watching, thanks for sticking with me. I appreciate it. I hate to say it, but I was defeated on this one. We'll get back to it in the next one. Thank you. One more thing, guys. I have a few edits of me just screwing stuff up throughout the episode, so I'm going to play that here right before the outro. Consider it a consolation prize for us not finishing out the series on episode 20. So anyway, see you in episode 21. Is using my digital slag. Whoa. A straight rod and a clamp, and the clamp clamps direct.
They won't know what clamped them.
That bitch is on there. On every stroke. Oh crap. Ow, god damn.
First I kicked the tripod, and I reached down to fix kicking the tripod, and I bashed my entire hand at the top of the foot peg, which happens to have metal teeth.
There we go. So that's before. Now it's time to tear everything down. Ah, damn. Where did that go? This is what happens when you punch your foot peg when it's dark. And you're trying to test spark and run a camera at the same time. And you don't pay attention because the foot peg's dark, like black. And then you just like swing your arm and punch the foot peg. That's the only thing. I have a few edits of man, warm right before the outro. Consider it a consolation prize for us not getting the episode done right. Man, it's a mosquito.